stutterer. I am a ton of other things as well. I am a friend, I'm a sister, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm a speaker, and of all of the titles that I've ever had, this is the title like that has confined me and sort of consumed me a lot more than any other thing I have ever identified as. And it's not the physical act of stuttering, like that is so overwhelming. It's, how stuttering tends to make me feel. I feel incredibly ashamed, right? Because I don't sound like other people. I feel like I sound, unintelligent. I don't sound articulate. I don't sound like a person that you can trust. And so, there is a ton of shame involved. And then, I also feel just terribly embarrassed. A lot of the times, like when I am introducing myself and I have to say my name, it takes me a couple of moments in order to get the name out. And so I'm constantly embarrassed. I'm constantly concerned about the way that I sound. I'm concerned about, how I make other people feel, all as a result of this, one very small part of the person that I am. However, it has been, an incredibly challenging thing that I've had to deal with, but it's also had a couple of very positive sort of influences in my life, right? I've learned, two just incredibly valuable skills as a result of stuttering. And those two things have taken me incredibly far. I have had to become a much stronger communicator, right? I feel like there are times when, the way that I sound, can be a weakness. However, I have had to learn to compensate with the, kinds of words that I use and the kinds of phrases that I use as a way to better sort of connect with people. And so stuttering, in a way, has made me an incredibly strong communicator. Another thing that it has done is that it has forced me to be adaptable to change. If you were to talk to almost any person that has a speech impediment, like we kind of all have to go through this same sort of process of, there are certain phrases, there are certain words and sounds that we always struggle to get out. And so we're constantly changing up the way that we say things and the words that we use. Another reason why, I have had to be just adaptable to changes is because, my speech can, kind of change how the way a conversation is going, right? Everything can be totally fine. And then I start to stutter, and then the other person gets incredibly uncomfortable, and it's totally understandable. And so, I have to be on my toes. I have to focus on, constantly being successful in communication and conversation that is constantly shifting and changing. So, like these two skills, communication and being adaptable to change, like they have one just overarching thing in common. And it's the reason why I am here to talk to you today. And that thing is empathy. So this is me. I'm around 3 years old. I know I am painfully adorable. And this is around the time that I began to stutter. But my parents, weren't all that concerned about it. A lot of people in my family had like some kind of speech impediments, and almost all of them sort of outgrew it by the time they hit 10 years old, 11 years old, 15, right? And then on top of that, a lot of kids who are around this age stutter. And so by the time that they hit, kindergarten and first grade, it just kind of goes away. And so, as you can tell, I have not entirely outgrown it. And so, over the years, I sort of developed these like communications neuroses where, I would only communicate if I knew I could be fluent, right? And so, I spent a lot of time just being incredibly pensive and incredibly terrified, right? I was so scared to really talk to people because I was afraid of, one, how I would sound, and two, how I would make other people feel. And so, I kind of came to this point in my life where, I was so terrified of talking and of conversation and of communication that I just, stopped going places where I was going to have to talk to people. And so, like after getting there and being in this place, I decided that I had to overcome this fear. I had to face this incredible fear of talking to people, of stuttering. And so that's when I began to pursue public speaking. And it wasn't, a career path. It was just a way to, not be as afraid to just talk to people. And so an interesting thing sort of began to come about, right? As I gave, more and more talks, people would, come up to me and say, hey, I really like that you talk about being vulnerable and, empowering insecurities. And then people would say that, like, I, just really appreciated your message of empathy. And I thought that was really interesting because, I know, all of those talks I gave, and like, I don't think I ever actually talked about empathy. I don't even think I actually said the word in any of those talks. And so, I began to do a little bit of research on the topic, and I just became really fascinated by it, right? I mean, empathy is just a constant presence. And so, I decided that I was going to focus, my talks on facilitating empathy and engaging empathy, both at work and in people's personal lives. And so, I am an empathy consultant. I have my own consultancy. It's called Communologue. I have done a lot of work with a bunch of different companies. I have a hook with O'Reilly. It is available online and it is completely free. I also have a course that's available on LinkedIn, and it focuses on, communicating with empathy. And so, like this course up here, it has close to, I want to say around 400,000 views. And I'm not saying this to brag. I am saying this to, show people that people find this, skill, this communication, this empathy, like they find this to be an incredibly important thing. And so people, companies, teams are beginning to really, invest in it. And so, this is what I do. I facilitate conversations around engaging empathy on teams at work. And so, I focus on sort of operationalizing empathy. And, I'm going to talk about that more towards the second half of this talk. So, like the overall goal here is to, to help build better teams with empathy. Now, there are a couple of things that I would like you to be able to do, at the end of this talk. And the first one is to define what empathy, is going to look and feel like for you, right? All of us are a little bit different. All of us have our own, insecurities. We have our own strengths as well as weaknesses, and all of those things are going to be very specific to all of the people here. And so, defining empathy is going to be, like a very personal thing. And so it's going to be a little bit different for every single person. And so at the end of this talk, I want you to be able to define it on your own terms. And then another thing is to, just reframe company culture. Culture is just a constant sort of source of both, excitement and concern, right? And so at the end of this talk, I want you to be able to think about culture in a way like that's actually going to make your company's culture a little bit better. finally, I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't already know. All of these concepts are things that you have been talking about and engaging in ever since you were, a very small person. And so, you know, all of the things that we're going to talk about today are common. They're simple. However, I want you to be able to approach these things from just a different point of view. All right, so empathy at work. So, the first thing that, I kind of want to explain here is the reasons why empathy is important. And what it comes down to is that, it's going to make companies a lot more successful. So here are a couple of stats. 92% of employees feel that empathy is undervalued in their companies. Whereas 90% of employees are going to be more likely to stay with a company that's going to empathize with their needs. So, what do these numbers mean? It means that empathy is going to keep, top talent inside of the building. A couple of other numbers. 87% of CEOs believe that a company's financial performance is tied to empathy inside the office, whereas 80% of employees are going to be willing to, work longer hours for a company that empathizes with their needs. What do these numbers mean? It means that empathy is going to make leaders a lot more effective. A lot of the times when we're thinking about these softer skills, right? Communication, collaboration a little bit, empathy, we sort of think about these things as only important in our personal lives. However, it's been proven that soft skills are incredibly important in the success or failure of a company. So, we've talked about why empathy is important. Now let's talk about what empathy, actually is. So, I go to a ton of conferences every year, probably between 25 and 30. And so I hear a couple of different definitions of this seemingly, strange concept. The first one is the dictionary definition, and it is the ability to share the feelings of another person, which, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The other definition I hear, and I don't know why this happens, but people get angry every time they talk about empathy. And so this other one I hear 10 times more than this one, and it's that thing that you have to do at work in order to not be an a-hole. Which, both of these things are true, right? Like they define it, they, kind of explain it. However, I don't feel like these definitions actually, course correct people, right? Like, they don't really give anyone the tools that they need in order to truly engage empathy, right? And that's because, empathy as a noun is an idea. It is intangible. There isn't anything, in those definitions that you can take, along with you, right? And so I began to think like, okay, how can I explain empathy in a way that everyone can understand? Is there another concept that, people get, however, like they can't completely explain? And then it came to me. It's being in love. Aww. So brand new love is incredibly just awesome. You feel like this person is the most amazing person that you are ever going to meet in your life. You do really dumb things like write 2,000-word text messages about how they have changed your life. No, really, you've changed my life. I just met you, but you're amazing, and I have to let you know. And then, you go even further and do even more dumb things where you have to show the world that this person is your person, right? So in the beginning, it is incredibly exciting. You are, just overcome with, I want to do everything with this person. I want to take this person everywhere. I am in love and I want everyone to know. And then, some time goes on and you guys, get to know each other and things sort of calm down, and then it kind of dawns on you like, oh, wait a second. In the beginning, it was easy. It was great. This person was amazing, and I would just jump through hoops in order to make this person happy. And then one day, you realize that you actually have to try. You have to engage in being in love for sometimes every moment of every day, right? In the beginning, it's so easy. As time goes on, it takes actual work, right? So, love as a noun is an idea. It is an awesome idea. It is the best idea. However, it's just this broad sort of term that's intangible and you can't really do anything, right? But love as a verb is a choice, and it's a choice that you have to make every single day. So if we bring this back to empathy, as a noun, it's an idea. It's a great idea. It's maybe the best idea. However, it's only an idea. As a verb, it's a choice, right? And it's a choice that, you are going to have to make. You are going to have to engage in it if you are going to get any of the benefits from it, right? So, how do you choose empathy, right? In my consulting practice, one of the first things I do is to, have each person really define what empathy, looks and feels like for them, right? Here's an example. As a person who stutters, I come up on, phrases and words that don't come out as quickly as I would like them to. And, the other people who I am talking to, they know the thing that I am attempting to say, right? And so, to show me personally empathy, I don't want people to complete my words or to complete my sentences, right? Like, I want to be able to speak, on my own terms, right? So, in your spare time, I think that a really good thing to do is to just define it for yourself and for the experience that you would like. So, we talked in the beginning about why empathy is important. And, I gave you a bunch of like stats and all of that stuff. However, in terms of, corporate empathy, one of the most important things about it is that, it shapes culture above everything else. So let's take a couple of minutes and let's talk about culture. So, like when you see this word, work, you probably think of something along the lines of this, right? A cubicle, office plants, conference rooms, uh, just like a very sort of traditional corporate experience, a normal corporate structure. However, the way we work is changing, right? A lot of teams now are, increasingly remote. A lot of teams are entirely distributed. And so, like what was everybody, in the same place, sharing the same space, has turned into a more sort of global corporate structure. And, that's why culture is now more important than ever. So let's define culture. And this is according to, I believe this is according to Inc. magazine. Yeah. So Inc. defines culture as the, shared values, attitudes, standards, and beliefs that characterize an organization and that define its nature, right? So when I see this definition, I see two distinct parts, and the first is the shared values, attitudes, standards, and beliefs, right? And so these 4 words, and here are the definitions here, like they are 4 very individual ideas, and they all have their own sort of goals, right? However, like these 4 terms are all sort of circling around like this same bigger idea, and that is the experience that people have when they are interacting with you or your company. So the other part of this definition is the final part, and that defines its nature, right? So culture defines you. However, it doesn't define you in the capacity that you think it does. See, the really big things, they are going to define your culture. A couple of examples here, and one of them is going to be a good example, and the other one is going to be Uber. Uber kind of, had a couple of years there where it became incredibly clear that their culture was terrible, right? Like there was misogyny, there was sexism, there was aggression, right? And so, all of these really sort of big, terrible things kind of all came down to, like a couple of different people. I don't know, out of the, thousands upon thousands of employees, I'm sure it was, like just a small percentage. However, like this small percentage of people had an incredibly enormous impact, right? And so, for a long time, Uber's culture was defined by these, like very big, very sort of overwhelmingly bad things. On the other end of the spectrum, you have a company like Netflix, right? Where, they really encourage their employees to think for themselves, to sort of create on their own terms. I know that the CEO there, he doesn't even, have his own sort of dedicated office. He, just works in the cafeteria. And, that kind of goes back to this, overarching sort of culture of freedom, culture of empowerment, right? And so, these big things really define your culture: freedom, um, autonomy, misogyny, abuse. Enormous, enormous things. They define your culture. However, those really big things all come from very, small actions, right? So as much as the, like really big things sort of define your culture, it's those, small, everyday little things that create your culture. And so, if you're focusing on, how to improve your culture, it kind of has to come back to those, everyday behaviors that, some people just can't get past. So, like if you improve those everyday actions, and your culture, like does improve along with it, then performance is going to improve. So let's now talk about just engaging empathy. I was actually on the Agile website, and I was reading over the manifesto, and there are a couple of points in there like that go just immediately back to engaging empathy. And so the first one I saw was that business people and devs, are supposed to work together throughout the entire project. Now, in order to work well together, to work, at the highest possible capacity, everybody on both sides has to have, some kind of empathy. Another point I saw, was to sort of create, the environment that people needed, and then, to trust, those people to get a job done. Trust is a cornerstone of engaging empathy. If you don't have trust, it's going to be a lot more challenging to, have perspective and to get context and to truly, understand the people on your team. And then finally, The point of, like teams being very reflective of their behavior, and then adjusting, the good behaviors and the bad behaviors to more sort of form to the team, right? This is an incredibly empathetic action. Because it comes down to collaboration, and it does, constantly have to be engaged. So, like I said at the beginning, I go into companies and I work with teams on sort of facilitating conversations around engaging empathy. So, I know what you're thinking. How does that work? Well, I'm going to break it down for you. So the first thing I do is I tell my story. So as a person who stutters, I feel like I am uniquely qualified and equipped to really, put people into the space of feeling sincere empathy. And that's because people, sometimes have to, completely stop what they're doing in order to, hear the things that I have to say. And so, the first thing I do is that, I create, the environment, for empathy to be engaged. And then the next thing is that, I have individuals define empathy, on their own terms. And then I have, all of the team come together and they define, it as a team, right? So what does empathy, look and feel like on a personal level? And then again, as a group. So another thing I do is I have people sort of go back into their own, personal experiences, and I have them sort of talk about times where, they have experienced empathy, and times when a person has, gone out of their way to not show them empathy. And then, I sort of bring it back home, like, okay, how have, you shown people empathy? How have you gone out of your way to not show people empathy? And the point of this is to, get people to think about empathy, as a verb, as a thing that has to, constantly be engaged. And then, we begin to see the patterns, right? Like the kind of situations where, people feel that they are experiencing empathy, and then the, kinds of situations, the communications, the conversations in which empathy fails. And then, finally, we kind of take all of this information and then we create a system that that helps teams to operationalize, this very bizarre concept, right? And so, how do you operationalize empathy? Well, I've kind of broken it down to three sort of main points here. And so the first is patience, the second is perspective, and the final part is connection, right? So all of these three things are going to help, you as an individual and as a team both engage empathy and to create a system that is going to help you guys when communication is going to fail or collaboration is going to fail. This is the thing that you'll be able to fall back on. So let's talk about patience. So, patience for me, it comes down to sort of stopping and sort of taking a deep breath and not being quick to, bias or to judgment or to anger, right? And so a lot of the times, I tell people, if you are trying to be patient, the first thing that I want you to do is to stop and to try to sort of calm yourself down, right? And then I want you to remember the why. A lot of the times when we are in, these more challenging situations, we forget that, all of us there have the same goal. It's just that we're, all going about achieving that goal a little bit differently. And so if you just remember the why of, this interaction, it's going to be a lot easier to sort of cultivate patience. So the next part is perspective. And so when I talk about perspective, I am talking about, understanding. A thing I like to tell people is that we don't have the entire context of what's going on in that person's life. We only know, the thing that this person tells us and the thing, like that people show us. And so focusing on perspective, on understanding, it's going to mean, kind of accepting that, I don't have the entire picture here. I don't know, exactly the things going on in this person's life. And so, I need to just approach a situation with a little bit more understanding. A really great way to cultivate perspective quickly is to rephrase what a person has just said to you, right? And so you are going to do this for a couple of different reasons. The first is for clarity. The second is because, like when people are talking to us, we don't always hear, the thing that they said. We hear our opinion of what this person just said. And so when we are rephrasing it, we are, doing our best to eliminate some bias. And the final sort of piece of engaging empathy is connection. And so connection is when you begin to speak. And so, every time that we speak to people, it should be speaking with intention first, and then, for impact seconds. Every single time that we are talking to a person, we're sort of creating the foundation for the next time that we are going to talk to them, right? And so that's why I say that connection and speaking, like that is truly the beginning of the conversation, and it's the beginning of the next, parts of your relationships. So, again, like this is just to sort of reiterate here that, the foundation of engaging empathy, um, is going to be patience. And then from patience, it's going to be a lot simpler to get perspective. And so that when you do, begin to speak, the connection piece is essentially going to take care of itself. So, a couple of takeaways, from engaging empathy here. The reasons why, you want to really focus on, engaging empathy is it is going to make you a much more, confident communicator, both as an individual and, as a team as a whole. The company culture, as a result, of teams and individuals engaging empathy, is going to improve, and the productivity levels of every single person in a building, is going to skyrocket. So, just to sort of wrap this up here, I just want to leave you like with the three sort of biggest ideas, right? So, empathy, is a verb. It is an action. It is a choice, and it is a choice that you have to continue to make every single day. The small, like everyday actions are going to be the thing that's going to, create your culture. And then the bigger sort of, ideas around the kinds of things going on in your company are going to define that culture. And then finally, engaging empathy is going to create a much more collaborative environment on your teams. So the last point that I want to make here is that, success isn't always traditionally succeeding. I don't know if that makes sense, so I'm going to try to explain that incredibly quickly. You are going to fail at this. I fail at this almost every single day. However, true failure only happens if you stop trying. So the goal here is to, engage empathy, even when you fail, just hit back up and try again. Thank you.